I'm Dustin Baker. This is Vikes Now, and today it is Sunday, April 3rd. We're going to talk about why the Vikings drafting a cornerback with the first pick is not a foregone conclusion. So I want to be very clear on this. I'm going to tell you why it may not happen. I still expect the Vikings to ultimately select a cornerback with the first pick. I think it blends best player available with the roster need, which you want to do ideally. And I think with the 12th pick, especially if Sauce Gardner's there, Derek Stingley, I believe this will happen. However, it's not automatic. I know that's not breaking news, but I'm going to explain to you several reasons why Minnesota selecting a CB isn't automatic. So the first little backstory is that this organization has drafted a lot of cornerbacks since 2013. Most of that was inside the Zimmer era. From Xavier Rhodes, Trey Waynes, Mackenzie Alexander, Mike Hughes, Jeff Gladney. And this team should be set for years with cornerbacks with the amount of draft capital that was spent. Kind of like the offensive line as of late. They keep trying to fix it, not quite working. Lo and behold, 3 of those dudes are free agents. The first 3, Rhodes, Waynes, Alexander. And the other 2 didn't work out for the Vikings, the most recent ones, which sucks. But here we are. They're in really rough shape at cornerback, at least for long term. This year, we'll get into that, probably doable with Dantzler, Peterson, and Sullivan. But it's strange that you and me, and everybody that we know had the joke at this time of year on the calendar, like clockwork, that said, which cornerback is Spielman going to get for Zimmer? And now we have the joke, just like the rest of this offseason, where it feels like a Spielman offseason, which cornerback are the Vikings going to draft under this new offensive first regime? So there's some irony there that we're in the same boat. We're familiar with it. They're going to get a cornerback somewhere because ultimately they need it for the long-term investment of the franchise. So I'm going to start with this conversation about the Vikings' need in the first round changed when Patrick Peterson re-signed with the team. So let me explain that. No longer do the Vikings have to panic and draft a cornerback at 12 or the first pick in general. I don't think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah would have panic drafted, but you never know. If you're staring at this depth chart, which we were 2 weeks ago, saying Cameron Dantzler, Chris Boyd, Harrison Hand, and we were like, they haven't looked at this. They haven't got to this on the itinerary. And we have. They haven't. So it was kind of goofy. Alas, it wasn't doomsday. It wasn't panic. They went and got Sullivan for the slot, and bada bing, Patrick Peterson is back. So it gave them necessary wiggle room to be nimble in this 2022 NFL draft. And here's what I mean by that. If they want to trade back, which I think I've said a couple times now, I'm starting to warm up to the possibility of them doing that. Not that they need my endorsement, but my prediction. I would have told you a month ago, like, they'll probably stay put and get Sauce Gardner. But now he might not even be there after a fabulous combine. So I think with all the value speeches that Kwesi has given ad nauseum, that there is a reasonable chance the Vikings trade back, maybe with the Steelers or the Saints, the Patriots in that 2018, 2021 spot, and get another second rounder to go along with whatever 18th, 20th, or 21st pick that they might get. Then the team can find a cornerback that it covets, whether it's that Elam dude if he falls further, or Roger McCreary in the second round. If that's somebody they like, we have no idea of knowing if they like him, those guys or not, then they could say, oh, we're fine. We're going to trade back and we'll get one of these cornerbacks on the second round. And for 2022 legitimacy and contendership sake, they can do that now because the depth chart that they have is serviceable. I don't think that anybody would call the trio, Patrick Peterson, Cameron Dantzler, and Shannon Sullivan, as boom, we're going to the NFC Championship and beyond, homie. I don't think that's what this does, but it also isn't the trash that was sitting there a month ago. And Dantzler's not trash, but in the comparative depth or relative depth of the rest of the league, it was spooky. It was eerie that all they had was Cameron and the guys behind him. They need more than that to be considered a contender, which, for better or worse, it seems like that's what they want to do. So it certainly, the Peterson addition changed everything about how flexible Kwesi can be. He doesn't have to fill for a roster need, even though that he doesn't seem like the type of dude that would do that anyway. That is vanquished. The roster right now, compared to the rest of the teams, if you believe in the spirit of what O'Connell can do in a McVay-ish way, the roster is decent. It's not incredibly deep unless there's a bunch of men who are second stringers ready to blossom as true blue depth players. So remember that if they end up not taking a corner, it's because Patrick Peterson, all-pro dude from the Cardinals, gave them the flexibility that, we can wait until our second pick to go get a cornerback because we've got guys who can get on the field on Sundays that don't need to come from the NFL draft. The next part on this, why this isn't a foregone conclusion, is that we have a new general manager. And we like the things that he's saying. We like his optimism, his intellect, his eloquence, his numbers-driven focus. But ultimately, he's going to be unpredictable. Spielman wasn't unpredictable because he had been employed for 16 years. So I could sit down for VikingsTerritory.com and reasonably write an article, pen an analysis about what I expect the Vikings to do in the draft because I can look back at history and say, all right, here's what Spielman likes to do. So last year, I think I wrote something, 5 things to expect on the Vikings draft, and 4 of them I got right. And that's not because I'm awesome. It's because I know what Spielman likes to do. I don't have that with Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. So this element of unpredictability, it mandates that only you as the fan is the one who's saying cornerback at 12. You don't know what he's thinking. He might think that the depth chart is fabulous, and Shannon Sullivan is going to just completely change the way that NFC North thinks about throwing against the Vikings. That seems like a long shot, but this man is so young and so new to this job that there is no easy way to predict what he's going to do. Did you think he was going to sign Zadarius Smith? I didn't. So there is a huge element of unpredictability that we didn't have probably all the way back to 2005 when it was Spielmanless and the Wilfs were just arriving. So keep that in mind, that you can predict till you're blue in the face what they do. I'm sure if you're like us in this Vikings community, the obsessionists, as I call them, there's nothing wrong with that, that you're doing mock drafts out the wazoo. And you shouldn't be completely married to a cornerback just because it seems like they need one. Kwesi might waltz in here and say, Jordan Davis is the guy that I'm getting. Screw your cornerback ideas. I'll find a guy in the 4th round and we'll make him a Hall of Famer. That might be the mentality. So the element of unpredictability is huge here. There's also this, and this is just sheer logic, is that there's still a lot of time. There's 25 days before the NFL draft. Shit can happen. Like whether it is clearing cap space vis-a-vis Eric Kendrick's contract or Dalvin Cook's contract, which would be a restructure in theory, and they could go get Stephen Gilmore. I don't have that in the rumor mill. I don't have any tips on good authority, but it's the unpredictability element that they could still go sign a cornerback because Joe Hayden's still out there, Richard Sherman's out there, and they could go sign a quarterback and make this CB room for 2022 pretty extraordinary with one stroke of a pen, if it was Stephen Gilmore, for example. And then, in theory, you're good. You don't have to worry about a cornerback at all. And if you got one that you know is coming out in the 2023 NFL draft, you can start planning for that. So we have a lot of time, relatively speaking, before the NFL draft that news can hit that completely anchors the cornerback room. And in particular, that would be the acquisition of Stephen Gilmore, which, it was a long shot because the Vikings don't have much money right now, $12 million, and 9 of that has to go to drafted players and practice squatters. So just keep that into account, that all of your mock drafts, some of you started them back in December, all of them are contingent upon time as well. Everything could change within the next 3 weeks. Let's see, what else do we got here? This is probably my favorite one to convince you that a cornerback isn't guaranteed to be the first pick. There is an argument to be made, not a great one, but one that I'm going to speak out loud, that an edge rusher is a bigger need for the Vikings. And before Zadarius signed, it was 1A and 1B. Like, what do you need more, an edge rusher or cornerback? Because that looked pretty puny from a pre-Zadarius standpoint. You had Danielle Hunter, who 3 weeks ago was going to be traded maybe, or just say the hell with the Vikings. Like, they make me play on these team-friendly deals too much. And there was serious thought that we are edge rusher deficient, and that is the last thing you want to be in a pass-happy NFL is you don't have any dudes that can rush the passer. You saw it in 2020 when Hunter was lost for the year with the neck injury. Everson Griffin didn't play for the Vikings, and Yannick Ngakoue was traded, and there was no pass rush. It was one of the most frustrating things about football, Vikings football, in a long time, especially that season, is that the Zimmer mastermind, the pass rush wasn't really there in 2020, but I digress. So now, of course, Hunter and Za'Darius are a fabulous duo that will probably wreak a lot of havoc on Thursdays, Sundays, and Mondays, but they're injury prone, or at least they have been as of late. A neck injury from Hunter 2 years ago, a torn pec last year, and then, by the way, Za'Darius had missed almost all of last season with a back injury. So it's not a good little trifecta there of ailments for 2 Pro Bowlers. So keep that thinking. If Jermaine Johnson, the Eden Prairie dude, is there at number 12, a case can be made that if this edge rusher trial of Za'Darius and Hunter goes pear-shaped, you're going to be relying on DJ Wanham, Patrick Jones, Janarius Robinson, Kenny Willekes. And I don't know if they'll go sign somebody else if those injuries happen, but the Vikings are fine right now for edge rushers because they believe in the health that will accompany Za'Darius and Hunter into the season. But it's a big if. And you look around the league, I said this last week, is that teams like the Bills that are a bona fide Super Bowl contender that keep getting nipped by the Chiefs, they've got like 5 or 6 pass rushers that are good, from Gregory Rousseau, Boogie Basham, Von Miller. Oh, God. Who's the other? I can't think of them. Or AJ Espinoza, and I think there's another one. So they've got all these pass rushers, and what do they know that this team doesn't? We got 2 that we know are good. Wanham, arguable, does some damage, don't know if he's a starter. And then the rest of the guys are developmental projects that are hopeful maybes. So some of these teams that are certifiably contending for Super Bowls have a barrage of pass rushers, and here's Minnesota with 2 really, really, really good ones. So I think that there's a case to be made that let's assume that we're here at this very time next year, and Hunter is disgruntled about his contract. They're talking about trading him again, just like we did 2 weeks ago. And the Za'Darius thing didn't look all that great. He hurt his back again. You're going to look back and think, God, they should have drafted an edge rusher when Jermaine Johnson was on the board, or that George K., the Greek dude. I don't know how to say his last name, and I still haven't researched it. But there's a lot of edge rushers in this draft, especially ones like Nick Bonito and David Ohabo. Now, his stock is probably going to fall towards the second round. That can be got, just like cornerbacks can be got in the second round. But I would listen to an argument that said you don't want to be deficient of pass rushers, and going into this thing that they're saying they're contenders with 2 pass rushers isn't enough. And you could start to plan for the future, life after Hunter, life after Za'Darius, if you drafted a Jermaine Johnson or Ohabo now. So that's just a train of thought to be mindful of. Then the last thing, and I said this a couple days ago, is the best player available argument. In theory, that alone, choosing the best football player available at 12, shreds, they're going to take a corner argument. It shreds it to absolute pieces, because who cares if they need a cornerback and they consider Jordan Davis the best player in the draft? They're just going to go get him, or Garrett Wilson, if they want to plan for Thielen's eventual exodus. What is Thielen going to be, 32? Going to be 33? I think he's going to be 32. They could just say, we're doing best player available no matter what. And in that case, cornerbacks an afterthought, especially if Stingley Jr. and Sauce are off the board. So if you think that Kwesi is going to waltz into this first-time job and endorse the best player available philosophy, which would be pretty cool, then who knows what he's going to get, what he might perceive as the best player available. There is no rubber stamp that says that's going to be a cornerback. It just happens to be a subtle roster need and a spot where Sauce and Stingley are going to be available. But if he fully commits to best player available, in his estimation, it doesn't matter what position the guys play. It could be, if he thinks Malik Willis is the best player available at 12, he's going to get him. If it's a running back, which would be very weird, he might get him. So the best player available philosophy is totally contradictory to you thinking that the Vikings are going to get a cornerback. And mind you, again, I still think personally they're going to get a cornerback. So, in summary, we have Patrick Peterson completely changed the dynamic of their security, their safety blanket, so to speak, that they don't have to panic draft a cornerback. Kwesi's unpredictable. He's young. He doesn't have a track record. You can't go look at his history and say, here's what he usually does, unless you think that exactly what the Niners did for several years and then a couple of years worth of Browns sample size are reasonable indicators. But he was just the guy in the room who we think was pretty influential. But that's the only thing you could pivot to for his track record. So he is wildly unpredictable at this point. A lot of stuff could happen. Trade could happen. Stephen Gilmore could waltz into the thing. That's another one. And then an edge rusher is also a very glaring long-term roster need, especially if Hunter and Za'Darius goes south. And then finally, best player available. That is a scintillating, titillating draft philosophy to have, and it doesn't matter what position the dude plays. So that contradicts anything that says the Vikings are going to take a corner. You don't know what they're going to take. I reached out to Sean Borman, and he's going to be on our show either the next episode or the episode after that. And he's going to talk cap. I'm going to ask him about his draft predictions. I know him pretty well. I think he's in the middle on Kirk Cousins on whether or not Kirk can take the team to the promised land. I'm gonna get his opinion on that, and then we'll talk about the realism of Vikings signing any more free agents. That's all we got for Sunday on Vikes Now. I appreciate you listening, and skol, baby.